I think we should start. I am excited about this topic. I've certainly done it before. Good morning, Rita. Rita, I hope you saw my intro. I answered a question of yours on FinCEN, and I'll try and post it on YouTube as well, just as like a little short 1 minute explanation. But today's topic is actually a little more interesting to me. It's a topic you really can't tell about enough. We can't go over it enough. And especially now, I feel like we are in the middle of inspection heaven. Like it's just all in on inspections right now. And there are always going to be questions. I legitimately believe that inspections are the most important part of your job. I think it's more important than negotiating price. I think it's more important than drafting the contract, any of that stuff. If you can kind of figure out how to navigate inspection time periods and coordinating, contractors and getting estimates and trying to talk to your buyer and even trying to talk to your seller through inspections, you're going to be a superstar. This is 100% the hardest part of your job, in my opinion. You may disagree, and maybe it's because this comes easy to you, but for most people, it does not. So, first and foremost, I work most with neighbor contracts, but the FAR contract, it works very similarly. So we're going to start by looking at the standard sales contracts. In neighbor, it's cosmetic versus defective. In FAR, it's working order, working condition, or defective item. So the first thing to know is what's covered and what's not covered. What is a defective item? What is working condition? And what's not? In neighbor, we would call that cosmetic condition. Um, Very important. And it really starts with understanding your buyer and being a great listener. Now, I will admit, I probably wasn't a great listener naturally. It wasn't something that I really focused on. I like making jokes and sarcasm, and, I like being the life of the party sometimes. So being a listener was something I actually had to work on, and it's something we all can get better at. Be a great listener. When you talk to a buyer, you need to understand what's important to them, where their mindset is, what their expectations are, where they're from. All this is very, very relevant. If you have a buyer who's from Connecticut, they may not know much about radon or mold. They may not know much about permits. They may not realize it's that big of a deal. Or maybe it's not a big deal. So being a good listener and just asking open-ended questions to see what kind of contract you need to put together and where their expectations lie, hugely important. Be a great listener. You should not be doing the most of the talking. You should let your buyer do most of the talking, and then you just draft accordingly. You guide them accordingly. And the word I love using is empower. I like empowering my customers to make great decisions. So it starts with listening, and starts with listening as to what needs to be considered a defect and what needs to be considered cosmetic. So I'll give you some hypotheticals. Let's say your client has never bought a house before. Well, they're clueless. They don't know. We need to spend some time on what and setting their expectations. So let's say it's a neighbor contract. You're going to tell the buyer, you're going to say, look, we're going to do an inspection. I'm going to give you a couple of names. You can call anybody else that you want. You can go on Google and you can ask friends for who they use. You can call around, get the best price, but you're going to want to do several kinds of inspections. You're going to want to look for anything that's broken, anything that's leaking, anything that needs to be fixed. And then you're also going to want to look for mold, any sort of airborne mold or surface molds. You're also going to want to look for radon. You want to explain what radon is. And you're going to try and be the best listener. You're going to try and see how much they know and how much of this is new information. If they're very experienced, they've done this a million times, and specifically if they've done this in Florida, then you need to ask them, okay, what were your expectations then? What did you learn back then? What would we do differently, essentially? All very important questions. And you just have to see, is the contract that I'm used to, the one that I'm going to recommend, still a good fit? Is it still a good fit? Now, Kim just asked about surface mold because I brought it up earlier. Is surface mold a defective item? Not necessarily. It's not. So understanding why you're using contracts and where the like the shortfalls are, very, very important. Being a good listener, evaluate all your options, and then come back to your buyer and say, I really recommend this contract, and here's why. I've been listening to you for a couple of weeks. I've been listening to you all weekend. Here's why I'm going to recommend this. And if we look at FAR as a good example, let's say you want to use the FAR standard contract because you want to negotiate the price once, you want to do inspections, and the seller will be obligated to fix them. That's FAR standard. Seller is obligated to fix defective items, or they call non-working order items, or um, repair items. Well, we just spent the last 5 minutes talking about mold and radon. Well, in FAR, mold and radon are not part of the working conditions and non-working conditions. It's not. So you have to add them. You have to add the addendum, or you have to create one. One of the problems with FAR, and I'm curious if people feel the same way, I feel like FAR doesn't hold your hand as much as NABOR does. NABOR has a form for almost anything. Like, it's crazy. They've got form for FERPTA, FAR doesn't. They've got forms for mold and radon. FAR, I think, only has a form for one of those. I don't remember which one it is. So in FAR, I would say prepare to do a little bit more work. It's still a great contract. I still like it, but understand where the missing pieces are. All right, so there's our idea. Understanding cosmetic versus defective. Let me share my screen so that you can see what I want to look at here. And I think this is very important for, I think it's very important to go through the highlights. If I was going to look at one thing in a sales contract with a buyer, it's going to be inspections. So most people are still using the standard contract. We'll go over, your options for using an as is and how that works. But we're going to go right to inspections. So this is, I just skipped 5 pages because I really don't think they're that relevant when it comes to setting expectations. So inspection period, easy enough for NABOR contracts. There are 6 things that we want to look at in an inspection. And I use this as my talking point. This is my agenda when I'm talking to a buyer. Number one, all the property, appliances, equipment, fire sprinklers, irrigation, ceilings, walls, doors, pool. We're going to look to see if it's working. We're going to look at that. And then number 2, radon. We're going to check that. Number 3, lead-based paint. See, I even forgot that, but this is my agenda. These are my talking points. I want you to use it the same way. Termites, good. We forgot to talk about that. 5, mold, air surface, dust, and/or other accepted sampling. So surface mold, Kim, there's our first answer. You are allowed to test for surface mold, obviously. So you're going to look for surface molds. 6, existing of open permits. Do buyers realize that permits are an inspection item? They're not a title issue, they're an inspection item. So these 6 things are what we need to look at during our inspection period. Now, here's the question, and I'll post it to you guys. What's missing? If you had an inspection period and you're doing your due diligence to make sure that the house is what you thought it was and that you can kind of move forward under these terms, is there anything missing? I'll wait a minute before readdressing that, but I'm curious. Put it in the chat feature or in the Q&A if anyone has any other suggestions. All right, so you're telling your buyer to do all this stuff, and then your report comes back, right? And on a lot of reports, buyers or the inspection reports have, they have like levels where it's, green, yellow, red. They need to understand, the buyer needs to understand that green, yellow, red does not necessarily make it a defective item. They are different. So even though an inspector thinks that this is a defective item, it doesn't necessarily match the sales contract. Very important distinction to make with any buyer or seller. You read the report for what it means to you, but you can't draw that conclusion over to your sales contract and what rights you might have. Do I only have, where are my messages? I want to know what's missing. What else is missing in these inspections? I'll give you a suggestion. Insurance. I think insurance is a defective item, but it's not in the sales contract, right? I think insurance is a huge part of our inspection, verifying that it's available at a certain cost, that there aren't any sort of conditions that are going to make it more expensive than we otherwise would expect it to be. I honestly believe NABOR and possibly FARBAR should add insurance as a defective item. Now, I haven't really said that before. I think it makes sense, though. I think insurance is a big part of this. And when it comes to hiring an inspector, I always want my buyers to call their insurance company first because maybe they need a wind mitigation study, maybe they need a 4-point, maybe those are the same thing. I don't know. So I think insurance should be at the top of the list. All right, then it's defective items. So I mentioned that a lot of inspection reports will specify whether it's defective or not, but really this is how we're going to define it. Cosmetic versus defective is defined here. And if you don't find, this is a good trick, if you don't find your answer in this paragraph as to what a defective item is, then I want you to look, where is it? Where is it? This paragraph, 319. So systems equipment shall be in working condition if operating in the manner designed to operate. Roof, ceiling, interior, doors, walls, foundations, swimming pools, working condition of structurally sound, watertight, and free of wood rot. And then if you keep going down, they define it even further. They don't just mention working condition, they say cosmetic. Let's see. Um, Seller shall not be obligated to take remedial action or grant a credit in lieu of remedial action in regard to cosmetic conditions, which is defined as imperfections. And a lot of people don't realize, but NABOR changes this every year, maybe every 2 years. They are always updating whether something is cosmetic or not. And it's really interesting to me because it's always based on some attorney or some broker's recent experience. And I'll tell you the most recent change was uneven or sunken pavers. Now, I know the attorney who was in the Legal Resources Committee who was kind of stood up on his soapbox and said, it's driving me crazy. I don't want pavers to be a defect anymore. I want it very clear that it's not a defect if the pavers in the driveway are a little pushed up from tree roots. It's interesting, right? That's how that sort of comes about. And then obviously you've got your maintenance obligations. So that's the big part there on, I really want everyone to do a really good job explaining defective versus cosmetic, because if you set your buyer up and your seller up front to manage expectations, then when they first read that inspection report, they're not drawing conclusions that are off base. You're giving them all the tools to be successful when they read that inspection report, and that will pay huge dividends. So I'll give you an example. We're about to write an offer, and as we sit down, I spend 20 minutes, 30 minutes kind of going over this inspection clause. It's the most important part right before writing the offer. And I really want to set their expectations like, guys, look, there are defects and there's cosmetic or working condition items. And then there's the stuff that's in between. So just keep that in mind. Everything's here. The inspection report will point things out. But if it's not X, then we won't necessarily be able to ask for it or demand it. We can ask, but we can't demand it. And that should drive one of two things. It should be like, oh, okay, all right, we get it. That makes sense. Or that's not acceptable. That doesn't work for me. We had this experience before, and that really, made me upset. I'm not willing to do that again. In which case, maybe you think about using a different kind of contract. I'll give you a trick. You could always include the as-is addendum. So a lot of people they still believe that as is means that you can't ask for repairs or credits, and it's not true. It gives the buyer leverage to be able to ask for whatever they want. because if the seller says no, because it was as is, the buyer has the right to terminate. So most sellers realize that. And again, we set their expectations. So a lot of times, I think it's kind of a neat idea. You put together a standard contract, you go over it with the buyer. Let's say, oh gosh, I can't accept that. That's not going to work for me. Say, okay, well, why don't we attach the as-is addendum, which gives you the free look, the ability to look at it, do your inspections, talk to insurance, talk to your lender, whatever it is. And if for any reason you need to get out or renegotiate, you can do that. And so you haven't wasted any time. You put together your standard offer, then you just added an addendum. And if for some reason the listing agent or the seller will not agree to the as-is addendum, the seller can just take that back out, and now we're negotiating back on a standard. I really love that process. I think that makes a lot of sense, even though I always prefer an as-is contract right from the start. All right, so that's our cosmetic, our defective items. The next one would be the as-is contracts and amendments or addendums. I think those are hugely powerful. The other thing is the interplay with the condo review period. So last year, they updated the condo review period from 3 business days to 7, 3 to 7. And I think that changed the game. Number one, it hasn't been disruptive, in my opinion. Deals aren't falling apart left and right because of the extra days. Really, I think people are just adjusting to the fact that, well, we were going to have an inspection period anyways. It's usually 7 or 10 days anyways. So what's the difference? So in that sense, again, simplicity is key. I always look at the condo review period in the same way that I look at an as-is contract. They match up. And so I want them to match up. But even if they don't, I'm going to treat it as such. I'm going to treat, if I have a condo review period, it's essentially an as-is contract. I don't even pay attention to the buyer election seller response. I don't play in those rules. So I'll give you that as our example. Let's go through a buyer election seller response. Let's just go through kind of how that works. So as you know, you do your inspections. You're going to look for mold. You're going to do a wind mitigation. You're going to do a standard inspection report. You can do radon. You're going to get all your reports back. And then you're going to ask for your buyer election. In fact, while we're talking, I need to pull up that form because I think that form is really, really powerful. Let's say you put it all together and you've got your form and you submit your election to the seller. So you've submitted it. And now the seller is reviewing it. So again, we've sat with the seller ahead of time. We've educated them on this cosmetic condition versus defective item, working condition. We've already kind of set the stage. They're expecting this. And now when they open up the buyer election and they open up the buyer's inspection report, they're doing it with some context. They're doing it with looking for specifically what are they asking for and what would I have to say yes to if I wanted to obligate the buyer to move forward. I've got to find this form. Where is it? Buyer election. Just like you guys, I'm always searching for the name of the form because I can never find where it is. All right, I found it. Okay, here's our form. So you're going to check all these boxes. And there's a lot here. So I want to point out a few things that I'm noticing come up recently. So if this is the buyer setting this up, or if it's the seller reading it, this is how I want you to think about it. So number one, almost always, you're going to be checking list of systems and equipment. Almost always, because that's going to be appliances, roof leaks, water heater issues, anything like that. Obviously, if radon is an issue above 4.0, then you can check this box. If you found termites, if you found toxic mold, not just the regular kind, but toxic mold, and then unpermitted improvements. So this is the permitting. So important, I said earlier, permits are an inspection item. They are not a title issue. And so therefore, it's in your inspection language. It's here. There it is. Always make sure before you send your buyer election, confirm with me or whoever you're working with, have you gotten a permit search? Do I need to put it on my buyer election? So that should be part of your process. Ask us or do your own search. You're welcome to look on the Collier County website, Marco Island's website, City of Naples website. You can look at all those and you can get all the permits. You can look at the whole history. But as just a courtesy, we always do that as well. So you're always welcome to ask. If we found something, we'll tell you about it. Then you're going to do one of two things or one of three things: credit at closing, remedial action, or a combo. Right. I think you guys are with me so far. One other trick: if you're asking for a credit, you need to have estimates. If you're asking for a credit, you need to have estimates. So credits are hard for that reason. You only have so much time. You may not have an estimate. You may not have time to get one. It's extra work. So what I like doing is I do the remedial action, and then I'll call the listing agent and try and negotiate a credit. Kind of still simpler. It's a little simpler, but you can talk to your buyer about that in advance and deciding, okay, how much time do we really need? Can you get a contractor in there, at the inspection if you think there are going to be issues? Let's be in front of this. For that reason, I love hiring an HVAC company to come to inspections. I I think it's really smart because they can service the unit. It can maybe even build some goodwill with the seller because even if you don't move forward, you've serviced their unit for them, and they can give you a quote to do the work. Inspectors can see things that are obvious, but they don't test the pressure or the freon levels. They don't do any of those things. They're going to check for the vents to see if they are coming out at a certain temperature differential. But importantly, temperature differential is not a defective item. It's really just an indication that something else is going on. So I love having an HVAC company as part of the inspection. I think it's a really smart process, makes you look good, and it protects the buyer. All right, so here's the really important part. And again, I am seeing people kind of mess this up just a little bit. So buyer has asked for remedial action. They've said that there's, these three things that need to be fixed. And the seller looks at it and says, well, Christian, you and I talked about it. The torn screen in the pool cage is not a defective item. It's cosmetic. You told me. But that's one of the three things that the buyer listed. What do we do? Most people are rejecting or countering it. And they put in here, seller will do two of the items, but not the torn screens. Don't do that. So newsflash, this will be for YouTube. Newsflash, newsflash. That would be this other strategy. This is what I want you to do instead. I want the seller to check the box accept. Let's say there are three things. They're going to do two of them, which are defective items, but they don't want to do that third cosmetic item. They just don't want to do it. It's torn screens, it's cosmetic, and they've done enough, and I took low enough price. I'm not doing anything else. You can kind of hear it already. My ears are ringing. So I want the seller to sign this thing for accept. And here's why. Read the language here. Seller accepts and agrees the buyer's election in part two above. Here's the important part, and they put it in bold. As to defective inspection items only, and not as to cosmetic conditions or other inspection items. So what I like doing is I check this box, and it protects the seller because it's saying, yes, I'll do it. I'll do the inspection issues. I'll address the defective inspection items, but not cosmetic conditions. It's what you do next that's important. So you have the seller check that box, they sign at the bottom, and then you put an email together with this as an attachment. And you say, dear buyer's agent, please see the attached acceptance. We're excited to be moving forward. Please note, the seller will not be addressing the torn pool screens as they are cosmetic conditions. Please let me know when the buyer intends on doing their final walkthrough, or we'll keep you in the loop as these items are addressed. I love that. So that begs the question, what's next? What do you do next? Well, you've accepted. The only issue that could come up, well, actually, there are two issues that could come up. One issue is the buyer disagrees. They say, no, 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 the screens are not a cosmetic condition. Or let's use a different example. I've talked about these windows. Talked about the windows before. Let's say they're foggy, so the seal has broken. And there are some people that believe that's a cosmetic condition, and there's some people that think that's a defective item. It's really hard to tell. I'm more in the line of it's cosmetic, but I've seen it argued. And as a seller, you just kind of have to address it as you can. So let's say it's the windows, and you check the box accept, and you put in that email, hey, by the way, we won't be addressing the windows as they are a cosmetic condition. The worst that they can do, they can't terminate because you accepted. They don't have the right to terminate. The only thing they can do is argue with you as to whether it's cosmetic or not. That's the only thing they can do. So you're locked in. You're going to have a closing. I don't know how that argument will go. That sounds like it's going to be more my problem again. That's okay. That's what we're good at. But we're going to move towards closing. And that's our big issue. So we're not worried about is the buyer going to, move forward? Are they going to make their second deposit? Are they going to do any of those things? They're locked in. That at least that first deposit is locked in. That buyer can't terminate under inspection clause. So it's a huge work process here. It's a really good part, really good thing to have in your tools where you're accepting, but noting in your email that you're not addressing those cosmetic conditions. Now, you don't have to acknowledge the cosmetic conditions. You could do them, or you could just not do them and not tell anybody. But it's going to cause some friction because if you sign this, most buyers assume you'll be doing everything on the list. Um, you don't want them to assume it. You want to just nip it in the butt. If it's going to be a problem, let's address it right now. Let's address it right now. So assign accept in your email, specify which items you won't be addressing because they are cosmetic. So that's the big issue, is that they could fight you. Usually we don't do it for borderline things. We do it when it's black and white, like torn pool screens. They are black and white. It's not a defective item. We're just going to tell you. The other issue is if it's not done by closing. So if it's not done by closing, then we have to negotiate either a credit or an escrow. Those are two things. One, two. Importantly, I didn't say extend the closing date. So again, this goes to setting expectations. If the buyer all along assumes that if let's say the radon's not addressed by closing, if they assumed that the closing gets delayed, that's going to set up the wrong expectation. So in advance, we tell them as part of this inspection, hey, by the way, if there's something the seller doesn't get to in time, they'll put 200% into escrow until that work is done, and we'll negotiate the terms of that at closing. So again, it's really about setting expectations. It's setting expectations with your buyer or seller before the offer is even made. It's setting expectations, reminding them before they get their inspection report and making sure that they're getting the right inspection reports. It's setting the expectations on the back end and telling the buyer which items you believe to be cosmetic. And then setting their expectations again for closing, not assuming that things just get extended or we can just terminate if they don't do the work. None of those things would apply. We just need to tell them exactly how the contract is meant to work. It's challenging, right? You can see it. You can probably hear it in my voice, and I know all of you have this, these experiences where it's like that dark cloud hanging over your head when someone has unrealistic expectations. If I think that a buyer or a seller has unrealistic expectations, I need to use an as-is contract. I need to. So I'll leave you with that. And actually, I spoke to my dad this morning, and his big point that he wanted me to put out there was disclose, disclose, disclose. Disclose, disclose, disclose. The trend is to over disclose. Every year, we're seeing more lawsuits where the judges and the juries are saying, you didn't disclose enough. You didn't go far enough. So our advice is get in front of it. If the refrigerator is broken because there was a leak, you need to disclose it. If there was a roof issue last week, you need to disclose it. If there was a major roof issue 10 years ago, you should disclose it. In fact, if you bought the house 6 months ago and you never moved in, and now you're selling for other reasons, you should maybe even disclose what the seller disclosed to you. Go back into that seller disclosure, pull it out. Is there anything that would be relevant? Anything that I should share with this new buyer? Because I'm aware of it. I was disclosed this. I need to make sure I disclose it to the new buyer. So disclose, disclose, disclose. So that one's from my dad. Hopefully that helps. Thank you again for everything. If you guys missed this video or you want to look at previous videos, youtube.com, just search for my name, Christian Ross, and it'll pop them up. I think we've got over 300 videos at this point, including other inspection related videos. So kind of reusing some topics here. But good luck. If you need me, just give me a call. Bye, guys.